Welcome everyone to a conversation with Dr. Kailas Roberts. My name is Emma Smith. I'm the project manager with Empowered Conversations, which is a project of Age UK Salford. Delighted that we've got Kailas back with us. So we've had a little gap of about 6 months and a lot's happened since then. So we're going to find out about that in a second. If you haven't been along to one of these webinars before, there's a Q&A function at the bottom. So Kailas and I are going to have a chat for, I don't know, like 40 minutes or something like that. And then we're going to come over to you for your questions. So if at any point, rather than write them down, you can drop them in the Q&A and we will pick those up at the bottom. So Kailas, we've got a really nice mix of people with us today. So we've got some NHS, some people with dementia specific focus, and also people affected by dementia. So it's quite a nice mix. We might have some more people joining us as we go along, so we'll see how we get on. All right, so I'm going to introduce Kailas. Kailas trained in medicine and psychiatry, and he has 15 years experience in assessing and treating dementia. It's really nice to have you back, Kailas. Last time we met, we were talking about like your day-to-day role over in Brisbane, and you just launched your book, Mind Your Brain, The Essential Australian Guide to Dementia. So how's the book going?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me back on, first of all, Emma. It's great to have a chat with you again. Yeah, the book's going well, thanks. You know, it's funny, it's just kind of a process that goes on in the background, and I'm not really aware of, you know, how well it's going in general. But, you know, I've had positive feedback. You know, I haven't had anybody say anything really devastating, and I think a lot of people have actually benefited from kind of what's in there. So I've been quite happy with it. I was mentioning before we started recording that it's kind of led to a lot of other things, you know, so my life has become a lot broader, if a bit chaotic and erratic. But I've had a few other sort of projects since then. So yeah, it's been an interesting departure from my life of, you know, 2 years ago anyway.
I know, because when we met, you know, we were talking that it's just like a clinic. You were just running like were you a GP or something? And now I feel like your brain in mind, something's changed drastically in the last few months. Looking at your website, what's happened?
Yeah, so well, up until January, basically, I was just doing sort of traditional private psychiatry sort of practice. I was just renting a room not too far from where I live, and just, you know, essentially seeing adult psychiatry patients plus some cognitive patients. But I then had the opportunity to rent this space at a local hospital, and I set up this memory clinic, which just sort of, I guess, is one of the projects that's come out of the book and things. So I've now put together a whole team of people, hopefully to provide good support. So we do cognitive assessments, dementia assessment. We trying to get an emphasis on prevention as well as time goes on. And we've got a team of lots of different allied health people, which is really, I think, where you get so much value when somebody's been diagnosed with a form of dementia. So we're sort of trying to be collaborative, all work together, be a one-stop shop, I suppose, for people with kind of brain health problems. So that's my current focus, in addition to the app and a few other things. So yeah.
When I was looking through the website, and it is a fantastic website, and I was looking at your team and I was like, oh my Lord, this is an extensive team that you've pulled together. And you talk about holistic, it comes up quite a bit, holistic treatment. And I mean, I know what it means, but I wonder what it means in sort of the context of your clinic. So what do you mean when you say holistic treatment?
Yeah, so I suppose there's like three parts to that. So first of all is that kind of the idea, as we were talking about, of having people with different skills that can offer different things to somebody with dementia and the person caring for them. And as you know, I mean, dementia is not something that just affects your memory or cognition. It has the psychological changes, the behavioural changes, there are social impacts or physical changes and things. So really the idea is to sort of find somebody who has dementia and then look widely at what their needs might be, and then have a team that can actually address those needs as sort of time goes on. So we're sort of heavily invested in the idea of post-diagnosis actually having all those supports in place that can kind of look at that, you know, the broader picture and things like that. So I suppose that's the first thing to say. So we've got an OT, physio, clinical psychologist to manage the fallout, both for the carer and the person with dementia, but depression and anxiety and so on. We've got neuropsychologists who are trying to do a little bit of, I guess, cognitive remediation. We have a physio that's doing some cognitive stimulation sort of therapy. And we have another physio who's sort of an OT who have more sort of traditional roles and things. We have a dietitian. So we're really sort of trying to cover as many angles as we can. So that's the first bit of holistic. The second bit about it is trying to not just treat the person with dementia, but the people around them. Because as you know, the flow-on effect of somebody having dementia can be quite wide, and we know the impact of things like carer stress and on the health of somebody looking after somebody with dementia. So we're trying to offer services to, say, the husband or wife of the person with dementia to help them cope and so on, and sort of navigate that whole sort of process. We also have somebody who's working as an aged care navigator, which I'm not sure, do you have anything like that over there?
It's just starting around dementia. Yeah, they've just been piloting it in a few areas, but yeah, go on, sorry.
Yeah, okay, so that's a big focus. And actually Coral, who's listening in, she's an aged care navigator who works a bit sort of further north in Queensland than me. And I've had a chat with her, and Katie Packer is a physio that's working for me, that's sort of working with Coral, and that's their sort of goal. But the whole idea again is to sort of try and essentially hold the hand of somebody who has dementia and their carers afterwards, because I don't know what it's like in the UK, but in Australia, the whole kind of navigation of the aged care system is a bit of a nightmare, very complicated. It's quite overwhelming when you receive a diagnosis anyway, and then you have to do all this other stuff. So I guess another part of that kind of holistic approach is trying to have somebody that can just look at the bigger picture and follow people through and triage and get them to see other people as they need to. So that's, I suppose, the members of the team. The other kind of bit of holistic is more to do with the prevention side of things. So we know, and I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about this, about the sort of things that we can do to keep our brains healthy, to reduce our risk of dementia and so on. And a lot of it's not just about, medical things, although that's relevant, but it's about sort of lifestyle choices and things that we can do. So again, when we're looking at things holistically in terms of brain health, it's really critical that we look at things like diet and exercise and sleep and all of those kind of myriad things that can potentially cumulatively lead to an increased risk of dementia. So those are the kind of the main aspects of it being holistic care, I suppose.
It's a very rounded approach, isn't it, for supporting people? So, I guess in the UK, in the worst case, you've got your GP, you go to a memory assessment team, you get a diagnosis, you're back to your GP, and that might be it. Luckily, in Greater Manchester and certainly in Salford, there's a lot of sort of wraparound services, and a lot of those are offered by the third sector, who are offering dementia cafes, one-to-one support for carers, the sort of stuff that we do. So we've got the communication courses for families, we do one-to-one support for family carers. And I was interested when you said the navigator, is that sort of throughout the entire dementia journey? I'm going to use that word, sorry. So they'll stay with somebody throughout, so all the way through to death and grieving and bereavement.
Yeah, I mean, potentially. I mean, that's the idea. And of course, it would be guided by the person with dementia and their carers and what they want. But there was a research project that was done last year called Cognizance, which really looked at what people felt they kind of missed post-diagnosis, I suppose, and what they were told and what they weren't told and things. And there was this obvious need that people expressed about needing to have somebody involved in their care that could just say, you've got these dozen things that you need to address. This is how you go about them, because there's so many ramifications. So I think the idea with the Cognizance thing was that you stay in touch at least for the first kind of 6 months or so, which is often the kind of the critical period to kind of embed the supports and get the other stuff up and running. And then beyond that, it really then just depends on the individual preferences. Yeah.
And I think for some people, they want to come back to the same person, or they want the same voice on the phone, that sort of anchor, really. I guess it almost feels a bit like an anchor for people.
Yeah, definitely. And so we have one person, Katie, as I say, who would be kind of that function, I suppose, but we also have hopefully stable members of the team, and we all communicate with each other, and it's a small physical space that we're in, so it's all very familiar. And so I think that really kind of helps that sense of continuity with things. So yeah.
Now, you mentioned prevention, and obviously last time we met in October, we talked a bit about prevention, sorry. So I've come across Brain Scan. So
Yeah.
as well as writing a book and setting up a new clinic, you've got an app out called Brain Scan. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, thanks. So, well, this is an iPhone app, which is only in Australia at the moment, but there are plans, eventually to release it everywhere. But it's a financial thing, that actually costs a lot of money to get the privacy and the data protection sort of stuff done in different countries. So I'm just trying to be kind of incremental with it. But definitely the plan is to kind of release it and have it available to people in the UK and the States and things with time. But yeah, the basic idea of Brain Scan is to, so the user downloads the app and then they look at, it sort of asks a lot of questions about their own individual circumstances to do with their lifestyle choices, to do with, so that might be things like, sleeping habits, diet, exercise, smoking, all of those kind of things. And then it asks lots of questions about your health in general, your vascular health, whether it asks questions about that are symptoms of conditions that might put your brain health at risk, like sleep apnea or Parkinson's and things like that. And then there's a number of questions on medications which have a deleterious effect on brain health as well. So you download the app, you answer all these questions, and then at the end of it, you get this sort of test score, if you like, a brain health test score. And then you get some, I guess, red flagged areas. So if you've kind of answered in a certain way about your sleep, it will red flag that as a problem. And then, so that's all free. And then you can sort of pay a small fee and then get to the sort of, I guess, the premium bit of it. And then that will tell you exactly what to do for those kind of issues that have been red flagged. And there's a whole bunch of other information in there, which is kind of stuff that I put together about the research and the science behind it. And then there's a video library in there as well, which at the moment is a bit, it's just sort of rather cheesy videos of me talking about things. But I am hoping to develop it so that there's perhaps some more, it's not just about me, some other interesting kind of stuff. But you have to be careful of copyright. So that's all a process and development, I suppose.
And for anyone watching, I'm giggling because he sent me a little video of what it looks like. So when he says cheesy videos, I've watched them. So that's why I'm giggling at that point.
Yeah, there you go. So you can confirm.
So the app's out, it's been launched.
Yeah.
How's it going?
So, well, it was out in September. So it's been out for 6 months. The problem is really that I haven't done anything with it. So I've put it out there. I haven't really marketed it because of the clinic coming up and some other stuff. So, too many irons in the fire, lots of things going on. So I will get back to it. It is an important thing to do, but I guess I've only got a finite amount of energy and that has to focus on the clinic right now. But, we'll get there, and I'm really hoping it will kind of be launched more widely and developed and be really helpful for people.
And I think, anyone who comes close to dementia, either through families or through work, it's a constant worry because, you're immersed in the world of dementia, and then you have any sort of cognitive issue, you can't remember someone's name, you can't remember a word, whatever, you're instantly thinking, oh, dementia, this is early signs of dementia. And you just think that because of course we would, this is the world that we live in. We are going to be thinking like that. So to have an app that you could go to and think, actually, I can feel empowered to do something to reduce my chances of getting dementia in the future, I think is really powerful.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, and you're so correct about the hypervigilance that we develop as we get a little bit older, and also when we're working in the space. So, like I'm by nature quite forgetful and I don't have great executive function, in terms of kind of multitasking and things like that. And when I was younger, you would just sort of put it down to having a bad day or something. But these days, it seems like something far more ominous. It probably isn't. It's just that you're aware of it more. So so I think anything that can help put people's minds at rest, or at least make sure they're on the right trajectory in terms of their brain health. Obviously, sometimes you can't avoid dementia. It just happens. It's just bad luck. But I think there's also a lot to be said about the modifiability of some of the things that otherwise might lead to dementia.
Feels like there's a tipping point when you get to 40. That's what it felt like for me. That and having a child quite late. We got to 40 and I was like, oh, I used to be able to hold all this information in my head. Now I've got to write it all down.
Yeah, well, I think having kids probably at that age, well, kids at any age, just because it just fills your life so much more fully and you've got so many more things to think about, inevitably the brain function is going to decline a bit. And like I found it with setting up this clinic because there's so many different strands to it. And I've been terribly forgetful, like I left my glasses in a public toilet a few weeks ago, because I don't know why I took them off, but but it was just a reflection of the fact that my mind was elsewhere. So that I think as we get older, we find it a bit harder to kind of compensate for these things. So stress, has an effect. A full life has an effect, and then there's the kind of incidental things that go along with that. So if you're stressed or have a full life, you may not sleep so well, you may not eat so well, you may not have time for exercise, and so there comes this kind of cumulative kind of issue, and you just have to try and get back and deal with what you can, I think.
It feels, from your work, and also I noticed there was a national campaign in Australia, Eat, Play and Rest. I feel like they've stolen that from Mars Bar, but I'm not going to go on about it. Anyway, Eat, Play and Rest. It's a national campaign. It's got its own website. It feels like in Australia, sort of really embracing the prevention message. In the UK, I feel like we're not as good. There's a bit of research here. We don't have a national public health message going out about this. It feels like Australia's in a different space, very unique.
Yeah, well, that Eat, Play, Rest campaign, so that was created through Dementia Australia, who are, I suppose, the premier organisation that provides support to people affected by dementia in some way, and that's very recent. And that's actually, it's really good because it is basically a public health message, and it's quite direct about, or very specific about things you can do. So the eat bit, there's recipes created by apparently very good cooks and things like that. So you can do that sort of stuff. The play bit of that's quite interesting. I don't know if you've seen the website, but they've even featured a professional gamer on there who talks about the cognitive benefits of gaming. And I've got 2 teenage sons, and that's all they do, and I don't want them to see the website. So but yeah, so
nothing to see here, lads. No, what you're doing is bad. Get off.
Exactly. So it's a really good message, and those kind of pillars about diet, about using your brain in some way, and the rest is not just about sleep, but it's about stress management, and the stuff on there about meditation and mindfulness and all those things that can be profoundly helpful, actually. And I think they're really kind of important things to for people to recognize, and again, quite empowering. And meditation is such a simple thing to do, actually. And as well as managing stress, it can sort of improve executive function and give you mastery over your emotions and improve. It's the one thing that has globally sort of been proven to kind of improve attention in people. So there's a lot of benefits, these very simple things that are being recommended in that campaign. So, and then we have a lot of other good research organizations over here as well that are dealing with stuff to do with prevention. So we have the Centre for Healthy Brain Aging, we've got the Healthy Brain Project, and all these are, and then there's a few others as well, a group called Neura, and a lot of them are doing kind of research on prevention and using the different lifestyle strands and sort of just trying to work out where you get the most bang for your buck. So yeah, look, I think Australia's pretty good like that. There are some more, I guess, global efforts. So there's a thing called Worldwide Fingers. I'm not sure if you've heard of that. So it's kind of like a multi approach kind of prevention project. So again, they're looking at various different lifestyle factors. And that's a collaboration between lots of different countries, including Australia. So there are some other things kind of going on. And I actually think that's quite exciting because we don't have a cure for Alzheimer's. There's this controversy about aducanumab, but we really don't have a cure at the moment. So to me, although we need to be looking for that, there needs to be an emphasis on the prevention and delay side of things. And we know for some people it can really work. So.
It's great. And it was great to look through the website. At the back of my mind, I was thinking, you can't bring this campaign over to the UK without changing that strapline. Otherwise, people will just think they can have a Mars bar every day and that's going to help. So I was just like moderate it a little bit. So is there a good age to start focusing on brain health? You mentioned your teenage sons. I've said I'm 46. what's a good age to start thinking about brain health?
Yeah, so look, I think that's a tricky one, and I guess I want to make one point up front that we should definitely be mindful, I think, at all ages about our brain, but it's not healthy, I think, to become completely obsessive about it either, because as well as kind of potentially causing a lot of stress about whether you're doing the right thing or not, you might, like, if you're actually trying to get everything exactly right, I'm not sure what kind of pleasure you're going to get out of life, so there has to be a kind of balance with these things. But yeah, certainly, we know things like education are important, so as a parent, being mindful of that is a good thing. Head injuries are increasingly a focus in terms of modifiable risk factors, and we think about kids playing football, soccer as it's called over here. And you probably know over there's a whole thing about, I think it's called the field trial or a project or something, which looked at professional footballers and their position on the field and the chances of them heading the ball. And there's this correlation between heading and head injuries and things. So that kind of stuff that happens early on is important. So kind of being mindful as a parent or a young adult, I think is important. And then midlife seems to me to be a really critical kind of juncture. And the benefit of that actually is, as you say, when you reach middle age, you start to just become a little bit more aware of these chinks in your cognitive armor. You're aware that things aren't quite working the way they used to, and so you become more aware of what you might need to do to help. So that's a good thing. But midlife is definitely a kind of crucial time, and we know particular things maybe to do with kind of vascular health. So blood pressure control, managing your weight is a huge thing at midlife as well. Interestingly, not so much as you're older, but as midlife is probably something that's really important to kind of address. And then even as you get older, there are still lots of things that you should be kind of taking care of. Like, so there's hearing, there's managing depression, obviously smoking and things like that as well. So it's kind of like a lifespan thing. But if you haven't, I guess I don't want to say to people that if you haven't done it by middle age, there's no point, because that's definitely not the case. But if the earlier you can sort of start trying to tackle this stuff, I think the more bang for your buck you're going to get. So.
All right, so this is just a thought, Kailas, and it's a bit different from what I would normally do, but I'm just wondering, what if I was a Your Brain in Mind client interested in reducing my risk of dementia, and we just work through that? So the what we've been talking about so far, but we'll do it on me. What do you think? Do you think that would work?
Okay. If you're feeling brave, sure.
I'm gonna. Yeah. I don't mind. Come on, there's not that many people on. I won't upload it onto YouTube.
No, I think that's a good idea. So I guess we'll assume that you're cognitively okay. So we're really just not talking about dementia management so much here, but just about the things we can do to keep your brain sharp and that sort of thing. So I guess if you were coming to me in my clinic, I mean, the first thing that we would be checking is whether there are any medical issues that need to be addressed. And some of these things are silent, so vascular disease, for instance, so heart health, blood pressure, high cholesterol. You may have absolutely no signs of this until you have a heart attack or you have a stroke and so on, particularly again, so that middle age kind of period. So I think checking out all of that side of things is important. And as part of that, the kind of weight management, and we do know that weight and all fat, but not every fat, is actually quite important, but probably very important to kind of address in terms of brain health, because visceral fat in particular, so the fat that's around your organs, is quite inflammatory, and that can then have a negative effect on your brain later on. So that we would generally suggest people do their waist to hip ratios, which give you an indication as a good proxy measure for visceral fat. So that's a good thing. If you can actually get this thing called a Dexa scan or a body composition scan done, that's fantastic, because that actually shows how much fat you've got internally, that hidden fat. And it's quite surprising. So this is kind of acronym, which is FOTI, F-O-T-I, which is a fat on the inside. And this is people that actually look quite skinny, but they've got visceral fat. So stuff like that, again, can occur silently, invisibly. And so trying to work out whether that's an issue is important. So vascular health, then we'd be looking at things like, possibility of having thyroid problems, the possibility of having sleep apnea, which again, if you live alone and you have nobody actually telling you how you sleep, then you're not going to know. And all you have is kind of a feeling of fatigue during the day. And then, if life's busy, you just normalize it. But sometimes it can be something like sleep apnea. And sleep apnea is really potentially a devastating kind of effect or condition sort of on the brain and creates brain changes. So I guess for those of your viewers that don't know what sleep apnea is, it's kind of this or obstructive sleep apnea, which is probably the most common cause, is when you're sleeping and your airways close up and you can't get oxygen in, and you have these brief periods of apnea, which is kind of a loss of oxygen. As you can imagine, that's not very kind of good for the brain. And you may be skinny and still have that, just anatomically. There might be other kind of risks and things, but that's really important to kind of address that. Then we would look at your medications. What are you on? Are you on certain things that can cause problems with brain health? Some of the psychiatric medications can be problematic, if you take them on the long term. Even other things that you wouldn't necessarily think of, things for your heart, cumulatively, these can be a problem. So we need to kind of check all that sort of stuff out. The other thing that I'm really interested in assessing with people would be like metabolic problems. So looking at your blood sugar, for instance, and we know that diabetes, which is the end stage of blood sugar problems, is definitely associated with an increased risk of dementia. We now have some evidence to suggest that you can just have normal blood sugar, but in the higher range, and that can be a problem too. So there's this real move to trying to get better blood sugar control. And last year, I bought one of these little things. They're called a continuous glucose monitor. I don't know if you've seen them.
Continuous.
But they're this like little well, yeah. So what you do is a little disc, and you put them on your arm, and they give you a continuous readout of your blood sugar levels. And I'm not diabetic, and they're normally are for people that have diabetes, but they give you a really good indication about when your blood sugar spikes in response to things that you're doing. And it can be quite surprising. So, like I remember having a bun from a local German bakery and my blood sugar didn't go up at all. And then I had a yogurt and it spiked hugely. So you just don't really know until you kind of try these things. So they're an interesting tool and give you a good indication about your blood sugar control as well. And we know that Alzheimer's disease is associated with glucose, sugar problems, insulin resistance and stuff like that as well. So looking at people's metabolic profile is really important. So there's a whole bunch of kind of physical things and medication things, I suppose. So coming back to you, so in terms of your lifestyle then, so how do you think you go and like sort of diet wise, and you have a pretty healthy diet, and what sort of things do you eat?
So I follow a vegan diet, and I would say that 80% of the time that's like a whole food vegan diet. So I'm making stuff from scratch. It's fresh, it's lentils, it's vegetables, salad, well, going into salads. I grow food on the allotment as well. So whatever's going on the allotment this year, that will be in our diet. So yeah, quite balanced.
Organic food?
Say again?
Organic food?
Organic.
Like on the allotment? Or?
Organic,
yeah,
and 90% of what we buy in is organic as well. So organic on the allotment, 90% of what we buy in is organic. So yeah, no dairy, no meats, quite balanced diet. Just in the middle of Lent right now. So no cakes, no biscuits, no sweets. Oh, something else. Booze is still in there. I didn't get rid of booze for Lent. I just thought that was a step too far. So yeah, I would say a balanced diet. Huh?
Yeah. Mars bars, maybe?
No Mars bars, not vegan, not yet.
Yeah, okay. So like a vegan diet is actually, I think, generally really quite healthy for you, for anyone. Like it's got a lot of benefits. The only issue really in terms of, or the two things that I would be thinking about with a vegan diet, which you're probably aware of, would be the B vitamins to a degree, which you can get from green leafy vegetables and things like that. But, I guess meats are a reasonable source of that. So that's one thing just to be aware of, and a lot of people with vegan diets can have those deficiencies. You can supplement, and that's probably okay, so you don't have to have other food sources. And the other thing would be your omega-3s. So We know that they're critical for brain health. We know that the main source of them is seafood, essentially. So they are a polyunsaturated fatty acid, which is really critical for brain health and maintenance. We certainly don't have evidence, I think, that vegans have a worse cognitive profile or increased risk of dementia or anything like that. But that's just something to be wary of. There are vegan sources of the omega-3 fatty acids, so things like, flax seeds, chia seeds, and those kind of things. But there's some concern about their conversion rate into DHA, which is the thing that your brain mostly needs. So those are the only kind of flags, I suppose, in terms of diet. The other thing I think is really interesting, there's research on this as well, is what do you think is the longest period of time during the day or night that you don't eat? Like, what's your longest fasting period?
So I should have mentioned, that's another thing I try and do at least 5 times a week. So to fast, so from my evening meal, so we've got an 8-year-old, so evening meals at 6 o'clock. And then we're at 10:30 now. I haven't eaten anything yet, so I will definitely be eating something after this webinar. But yeah, so it's with like, what's that? 14 hours, 15 hours of sort of fasting.
Yeah. So there's a lot of research now to suggest that that's good for your brain for various reasons. Your body's either in a state where it's kind of resting and digesting, or it's trying to process a lot of other kind of foods, or so that there's kind of this balance that your kind of body needs. And the fasting just allows you essentially to kind of cleanse your body of the things that need to be degraded and got rid of, including inflammatory molecules and so on. So all of those things, I think, can come about with time restricted eating or fasting or whatever you call it. So I think it's got a lot of benefits. I'm also interested in the acute effects of fasting, because there's research out there that suggests that while you're in that fasted state, you're cognitively sharper. Have you found that? Or like you can just think a bit more clearly, your memory's a little bit better when you're fasting, or not so much?
It's a hard one to tell, because I'm a morning person, so I'm always sharper in the morning, so I can't really.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's just an interesting thing, and maybe comes back to the sort of evolutionary element. So if we are back when we were sort of roaming the plains, if we were essentially in a fasted state, it meant we're running out of food, so we needed to be much more on the ball to look for food sources and things like that. So it kind of makes sense that your brain energy is preserved to a degree, and then you really got to think about food. Whereas if you've just eaten buffalo or something, who cares? You can just kind of lie back and not worry for a while. So yeah, it's another interesting element of things.
Janet's just popped a comment in to say, what's the optimum time for fasting?
Yeah, okay. Well, I think the short answer is we don't know. I think this is kind of like golden 16 hour to get the start of the proper ketosis, so ketosis is the state where you're producing ketone bodies from fats and using them as an energy source rather than glucose from carbohydrates and things like that. So for most people, around about the 16 hours is often what people talk about. But I think there's lots of other fasting. So there's Michael Mosley's sort of 5-2. Dale Bredesen, who's a neurologist in the States, talks about the keto flex 12-3 or something. So I think as a starting point, trying to just go 12 hours, generally overnight, last meal at 6, don't eat till 6 in the morning. That's a really good kind of start to things. But I think there's lots of different permutations to fasting, and we don't really have research to say one's better than another.
Claire's just said, I do this fasting at times, and I do feel brighter.
Yeah, there you go. So, I kind of, sometimes I find it's okay, and then sometimes I feel like I've completely deprived my brain of all sources of energy, and it just doesn't work. And I don't know why that is, but yeah, like that's the general rule. I think there's presumably obviously a point where you fast for too long and there is no energy left and you're definitely not sharp, quite the opposite. But there's probably a golden period.
the more we talk about this, the more hungry I'm getting. I've got to admit that. I'm thinking, oh, what am I having for my breakfast? Kailas, I've noticed that we've dropped in levels, so I'm up here and you've just sunk down.
I think.
Come back up.
There we go.
There we go.
Thanks. Yeah, we did think that was going to happen as well.
We don't want to be saying fasting results in shrinking or any messages like that. Okay, so that's sort of my diet. Talked about.
So your diet. So the other thing I suppose is sleep. And what do you think your sleep's like?
I'm a solid 8-hour girl. If I don't get 8 hours, I'm unhappy. But I have an 8-hour, generally don't get up for the toilet or anything, full 8 hours.
Yes. Okay. Well, that's great. That's probably exactly what we want. So we know that if you sleep significantly under that, or you sleep significantly over that, then it's probably not good for your brain. And we know that sleep has a number of different roles in brain health. So the REM sleep particularly seems to be important for memory consolidation, although deep sleep probably does have a role as well. And then we probably talked about this last time, but the deep sleep and the glymphatic system, which is, I just find this really interesting. So for those that haven't heard about this, these are these kind of vessels that run alongside the blood vessels in the brain. And then every time the blood vessels kind of pulse, they put pressure on these glymphatic channels, which then push fluid out into the brain, like a sort of flood crossing a plain, if you like. And they take with it all the kind of metabolic debris and the inflammatory molecules that have been developing through metabolic processes during the day. So you kind of get this brainwashing, brain cleansing kind of effect when you're in deep sleep. And if you don't have deep sleep, you don't get that. And so you have this accretion of these inflammatory molecules, which then probably over the long term is really not good for your brain. And we do know that chronically poor sleep seems to be associated with an increased risk of dementia. So, so it's a really interesting kind of line of research. There's some suggestions that if you have, and I'm not necessarily recommending this, but there is some suggestions that if you have a glass of wine before you go to bed, then it might open those glymphatic channels a bit more. So, maybe that's one of the kind of benefits of it. But yeah, it's a fascinating thing, I think, sleep and brain health generally.
You put a whole positive spin on brainwash there. Normally we think of it as a negative term, but actually we're like, oh God, yeah, my brain has been washed at night time and I wake up fresh in the morning. It's absolutely crucial. And,
I think compounding that, if you don't sleep well, you preferentially shut down the front part of your brain, which is the rational part of your brain that says to you, don't eat that Mars bar, don't have that donut or whatever. And you also have disordered hormones. So there's these two hormones that dictate appetite and hunger. One's called ghrelin, one's called leptin, and they sort of regulate your appetite, and they get completely out of whack when you don't sleep. So not only are you not getting the anti-inflammatory effect of sleep, but you're hungrier the next day and your brain is shut down, so you're not going to make healthy food choices. So you're more likely to put on weight, and then that's going to cause inflammation, and so round and round it goes. So it's this kind of, really problematic kind of issue, I think, for a lot of people.
Well, I heard you say a glass of wine at night is something that is good for us and will help with our brainwashing.
Yeah. Actually the alcohol thing, I mean, that's probably worth having a talk about as well, because again, like you try to look for positives in all of this, of course. And, I like a glass of wine now and again. And we don't really have research in general that drinking small amounts is particularly bad for your brain. There's, some research suggests it's possibly even good for your brain, maybe because of that lymphatic connection, maybe because of vascular health, particularly wine, probably. There are some people who maybe are higher risk than others. And I think this is going to be an interesting area of research. So there's a genetic risk factor for Alzheimer's disease called ApoE4. So it's, you get one gene from your mum, one gene from your dad. And then if you have 2 copies of this ApoE4 gene, your increased risk of Alzheimer's is 12 to 15 fold. So it's quite substantial. And there are differences in people that have this kind of gene compared to those that don't, in terms of the way that they process glucose, so sugar, the way they process fats and so on, but also possibly the way they process alcohol. So some people, if you have, those extra risk factors, maybe shouldn't really be drinking at all. But we don't really have, I guess, enough research to say conclusively one way or another. But, I think actually hopefully about 15, 20 years, we'll have a much better idea about the individual genetic profiles of things. We'll also have more data about nutrigenomics, which is the kind of the science of how people individually process foods depending on their genes, which will then give us an indication about your microbiome and what sort of foods you specifically should be eating, because some people process things differently to others depending on your gut bacteria and stuff. So I think, give it a couple of decades, we're going to have a much more nuanced, finessed approach to managing brain health. But at the moment, we just have these general guidelines.
So alcohol consumption then for me, Kailas, so maybe 2 or 3 beers a week, maybe 2 glasses of wine, 1 gin and tonic if I'm going for it. So not excessive. Obviously at a party that changes a little bit, but generally average week to week, that's what it would be.
Yeah, so that's probably not too bad if you're otherwise kind of healthy and things. I mean, we don't have too many guidelines on alcohol use and brain health specifically. So we tend to kind of follow the general guidelines, which I'm not quite sure what they are in the UK, but here it's like 10 standard units a week, which is a bit more than a bottle of wine. Some countries are maybe a bit more generous. So I seem to remember it might have been Ireland where they're more generous in terms of their allowance, but that might be a stereotype, I'm not sure. But so there's some individual variation, but it sounds like you're probably, you're not too bad in terms of what you're consuming. Yeah.
So then weight wise, Kailas, I'm like a lot of people, a stone heavier since COVID.
Yeah.
So yeah. A stone heavier than my normal. So normally I would be about 10-10. Now I'm about 11-10. And it's a lot harder to shift it.
Yeah. I know, look, it's harder to, I think it is a lot harder to kind of shift things when everything else kind of is going on in your life as well. But as I say, weight is it is a concern, like particularly, I guess, middle age and that kind of era. And I guess the things to do, there are obviously dietary interventions, which can be quite helpful, but exercise is the other sort of critical thing there. And there's probably some extra benefit in terms of exercise, doing sort of high intensity work. So are you sort of reasonably physically active? What sort of stuff do you do?
So day to day, about half an hour of yoga and 1 hour of dog walk a day. And then twice a week, 3 times if I'm lucky, I'll cycle. So I'll do a cycle to the swim pool. I'll do about a 2.5K swim and I'll cycle back. So yeah, probably getting about an hour and a half of exercise at least twice a week. So swimming, doing cardio, doing speed work in the pool.
Yeah, well, I mean, that sounds really good. So the whole idea of the effectiveness of exercise, it correlates with the intensity, which can either be, how hard you're going at any one particular moment or how long you're doing it, I suppose. But one of the advantages of high intensity sort of interval training, which is something I often kind of recommend as long as people are medically okay to do it, is it's so quick. You can kind of get it over and done within sort of 10, 15 minutes. So you're probably aware of what it is, but you go really hard for 20 seconds or so and rest for 10 seconds and cycle through those kind of things. So it's the efficiency, but what you're doing there sounds pretty good, as long as you're getting kind of out of breath, as long as it's that kind of at least moderate amount of exercise. Brisk walking is considered good. Interestingly, I was listening to a podcast recently which was talking about the calories that you consume during different types of exercise. And as humans, we're really biomechanically engineered to walk. So we don't really lose many calories from walking because that's just what we do. But as soon as you start running or swimming, stuff that's biomechanically more challenging, you seem to then kind of consume more calories, which should then have a preferential effect on kind of weight and so on. So maybe what you do does actually count to an extent.
Okay, so we've talked about diet, we've talked about sleep. Janet, I will bring up your question in a minute, so don't worry, we'll come to your question. So we talked about diet, we talked about sleep, talked about exercise, talked about booze.
Yeah. So the other thing associated is social connection. You strike me as a fairly sociable person, so you may well have that covered, but you'd have a lot of contact with others.
Yeah, and I suppose different now in that my work day now is mainly in my little office at home. But I am that person that takes the dog out and I'm scanning to see who I can chat to on my way out. So I'm sort of maximizing. So like at swimming, I'm chatting to people there. At the school gate, I'm chatting there. And then when I'm on my dog walk, I'm looking for people to chat to. So probably less interactions physically through work, but I feel like I'm compensating in other areas.
Yeah, okay. So I think the thing about socialization is it's a very personal thing. So you may not be as happy as I would be with having less social contact. So I'm not naturally, a particularly sociable person, actually. My wife is very social, so she organizes stuff all the time, which I guess is great for me, but I can sometimes kind of take it or leave it. So she needs it, I don't. And probably the importance of that is it's about the emotional feeling associated with the connection or lack of it. So social isolation itself is possibly a problem for the brain, but the most important thing is whether you feel lonely, whether you feel you're kind of getting adequate connection with others. There's actually a really interesting thing about the isolation bit itself, though. So when you just don't have that physical connection with people, there is some suggestion that you're coming back to the microbiome, the bugs in your gut, that your diversity is less because you're not kind of essentially cross-contaminating. And so maybe that's one of the ways in which isolation is not a good thing. So you get dysbiosis, your gut bugs are all disrupted, you get inflammation, it affects your brain health, and that's a problem. So that's an interesting bit of research as well.
I sort of think I've got an 8-year-old going to school and not washing her hands as much as she should do. That probably helps with that.
Yeah, you probably got one of the most diverse microbiomes around, I would imagine.
All right, this is your time to put your questions in. So we've got a question from Janet. If you've got any other questions, you can pop them in the chat or pop them in the Q&A and we'll pick them up. We've got about 11 minutes left. Kailas, is there anything else you want to find out about me, or have you sort of covered the areas that you would typically cover for a client?
Those would be most of the things. I mean, I suppose the other thing is about using your brain. I mean, that's obviously really important, and doing this kind of stuff is actually probably really good. These kind of on-the-spot conversations, which you're under a bit of pressure, have to kind of the to's and fro's of conversation, that actually really kind of does tax the brain. So you probably got that side of things covered, I would imagine. But if people don't use their brain much, then and in a way that's helpfully stressful, then that can be a problem. So that's a fine line, of course. And I've had people that get completely obsessed about doing all these kind of brain games just to improve their score on them, and that's not good because the stress is going to undo all the good that you would otherwise have. So that's probably about it. Your hearing, obviously you can hear me. That's another thing that we really need to bear in mind as well. Yeah.
I was just going to say I do a daily Wordle now.
Oh, do you? Yes.
Yeah.
My family, we've got, because I've got a few siblings in the UK. I've got a brother in the States, and we have this kind of Wordle kind of thing on WhatsApp, which is kind of fun. So yeah, so that's good.
It's a good way to connect, and definitely it's improved my Scrabble score, so that's good. I'm happy. All right, so Janet asked, thank you for that. Oh, Janet's on Wordle. Janet, you asked, as we get older, deep sleep becomes interrupted more often. Have you got any tips to help other than drinking a glass of wine before bed?
Yeah, so that's quite right. Deep sleep does become more fragmented, sleep generally becomes more fragmented, and we do tend to get less deep sleep, which, in of itself might be another reason that as we get older, that the brain becomes more compromised. So that definitely does happen. And as you get older, it's not as though you need less sleep, unfortunately. I think that's a bit of a myth. So you still need to have sleep, but it does become fragmented. The tips to help, well, if you've got chronic sleep problems, I would definitely see somebody about them. Even if you think maybe it's normal, but you kind of feel tired during the day, I think you should get that checked out, because as well as those things like sleep apnea, things like reflux can cause problems, and there's all sorts of other medical issues. And so getting that addressed, pain, as we get older, we can often be in pain. And so that can contribute as well. So I think making sure all of that stuff's sorted out is good. Then there are sleep hygiene measures, which most people have kind of heard of. So this whole sort of rules around sleep and behavior, and making sure, your bedroom's just for sleeping, maybe one other thing, but mostly sleeping. And then having, like with a lot of my patients, one of the most useful things they have to do with sleep hygiene is about setting an alarm to get ready to go to bed. I think that's a fantastic kind of tip. So an hour and a half, couple of hours before you go to bed, you just, dim the lights, try not to watch anything kind of too stimulating, avoid using screens, both because of the blue light potentially, but also because of the stimulus you get from them. And then just get into that kind of routine that allows your body to kind of realize that it's actually time to go to sleep. You're physiologically prepared. I know Matthew Walker, who's the kind of the doyen of sleep, is an English chap who's over in the States. He's written a really good book on sleep called Why We Sleep, I think. But he talks about how you need to think about your sleep the moment you wake up, which is quite true. And so what we need to try and do is entrain our circadian rhythm so that we are matched to the day and the night. And of course, centuries ago, that's exactly what we did. We got up when the sun came up, we were outside, we were exposed to this bright light, the melatonin production went down and so on. And then we were out all day, then it becomes dark and you're at home and your body goes, okay, it's time to sleep. So that's the natural way of doing things. Now, of course, we kind of almost do the opposite. So we might get up early, but we kind of tend to just go to work, and then we don't really see much sunlight. And then it gets to the night time, and then we turn all the lights on and we watch screens. And so it's kind of like a reverse of what we should be doing. So I think being mindful of that, trying to get out early in the morning, trying to get that bright early light and get your circadian rhythm correct is probably something else that's really helpful as well. Physical activity, probably nothing too strenuous, and maybe not too late at night, although that's a very individual thing. Some people can exercise and go to sleep, no problems, but that's probably another kind of tip as well. And there's lots of things about, not eating, try not to eat maybe for a few hours before you go to bed, because it's a reflux thing as much as other kind of issues. And not too much alcohol and things like that as well. So so there's a lot of tips, but and the other big thing is actually try not to get too stressed about it, because that's just a disaster. And there's if sleep hygiene doesn't work for you, nothing else is working, as long as you check in with your GP, the next step is really, which is very effective for people, something called cognitive behavioural therapy for insomnia, which is actually really all about, or a lot of it's about trying to undo the stress thoughts that go along with insomnia, because it's one of those ironic and horrible vicious circles. You think you're not going to sleep, you probably won't. So you kind of need to undo that.
Yeah, having said I'm a solid 8-hour girl, if I wake up, so say the cats wake me up at 5:30, generally then I'm going to struggle to get back to sleep. Then I'm lying there thinking, I need to go to sleep now. If I don't go to sleep now, I've not had my 8 hours. That's not going to be good.
Yeah. So that we can all, like, I'm terribly obsessive about sleep. I have to admit that. It's charging, so I don't have it on, but I have a thing called Oura Ring, which is, one of these sleep trackers that tells me how much deep sleep I get, how much REM sleep I get. And there's a danger with those things. They can give you some useful information, but you can become obsessed. I only got 13% REM sleep last night. I only need 15%, so you do need to be a bit careful about that stuff. But being able to measure things on the same token is actually quite helpful, because you can measure something, see what the issue is, make a change, see if it improves or not. So that's quite helpful as well.
I feel like you're a gadget man. You're like, oh yeah, I put that on to do my blood sugar. Oh, and I have this ring on to tell me this.
Actually, I do like my gadgets. Yeah, in fact, my next purchase is hopefully going to be a thing called a Muse headband, which actually looks at your brain waves and converts them into sounds. And it's a meditation aid, essentially. So if you're meditating correctly and you're getting your brain waves, the correct brain waves, then it quietens down. And if you're not doing it effectively, it's kind of like a stormy sound. So it's kind of a lot better way of focusing your meditation, I suppose. So yeah, so I like my gadgets.
Do you like your gadgets? Right, Rebecca said, do you think it's worth getting estrogen HRT even if you're not having bad menopause symptoms? I believe there's evidence that estrogen is a preventative factor for dementia.
Yeah, look, that's a really controversial topic, and there are some people that are absolute zealots and say, you know, everybody should be on estrogen replacement therapy or some sort of HRT, and there are other people that just say, look, you know, the risks just outweigh the benefits and so on. And I don't think we really have solved that. The general guidelines at the moment still don't recommend using HRT or estrogen only therapy just for the purposes of brain health preservation. So that there is evidence definitely that estrogen deficits may be associated with Alzheimer's disease later on. There's evidence that if you have an early menopause, you increase your risk of dementia, whether it's a surgical, you know, an operation, hysterectomy, etc., or otherwise. You know, those things can have an influence. So estrogen definitely seems to play a part in brain protection and health, but we're just not at a stage where we kind of would routinely recommend estrogen. It might change, but yeah, my understanding is that the guidelines at the moment say not to do that.
Okay, there's your answer, Rebecca. We're in our last 2 minutes. Oh, she said, okay, thanks. If you've got a question, please get it in now. Otherwise, we'll run out of time. So this is your last 2 minutes to get these questions in. I'm excited. So are you going to prioritize getting that app over to the UK as you are from the UK?
Yeah. That is that's the plan. I've just got to find some extra cash somewhere, and I think it's about $10,000 to $15,000 to get the privacy stuff sorted. So it's not an insignificant amount, but that is definitely my plan at some point. So I'll let you know when it's available.
We'll get a crowdfunding going for that. Definitely.
Great idea.
Brilliant. You know, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really helpful. Rachel has just said, I love the meditating app idea. That's from Rebecca. And Rachel has said, great session. Thank you. It has been really good. And I hope that everyone's got some tips and some thoughts about what changes they might want to make to their lives just to reduce their chances of getting dementia. Great session. Thank you, Emma and Kailas. That's from Coral. Thank you, Coral. It was lovely to have you on. Amanda said thank you. So I'm going to love you and leave you. We don't have any webinars for the next month. I'm having a little sabbatical. So I'll enjoy that time. Kailas, thank you so much for giving us your time today. Appreciate that. And it was great to find out about all your gadgets. Yeah, they're fun. So, and yeah, thank you again for having me on. It's really nice to talk about this stuff and to have the opportunity to try and talk to people about it. So it's great. And let's carry on chatting, hey, about things that we can work on together. That'd be really good. Sounds like a good plan. Yeah. Excellent. All right. I hope that everybody has a lovely day. Thank you so much. Take care.